Hi, I'm Femi OK. Today, why are looted Ethiopian treasures from the 19th century still in the UK?
I'm Malika Bilal. A new exhibition in London showcases plundered artifacts from the Abyssinian Empire, casting a spotlight once again on the debate over whether the spoils of war should be returned to their home countries.
So right now, you are in the stream. We're live on Al Jazeera and YouTube. So leave your comments in the chat box and Malika and I will do our best to get them into the show.
My name is Bobkin. I'm an activist and an economist, and you are in the stream.
Ethiopia's government is calling for the return of cultural artifacts plundered 150 years ago by the British Army. The relics, some of which are currently on display at London's Victoria and Albert Museum, were stolen in 1868 after the Battle of Magdala. That's when British troops raided the fortress of Abyssinian Emperor Theodorus II to release a group of imprisoned missionaries. Ethiopia has previously requested that several British institutions give back hundreds of manuscripts and artifacts, and that the remains of the emperor's young son, Prince Alemayehu, who was kidnapped during the same raid and taken to Britain, be returned.
V&A Museum Director Tristram Hunt has proposed lending items in the museum's collection to Ethiopian institutions as part of a long-term loan partnership. But Iman Mohammed, who pitched today's show, suggested this idea instead. Take a look.
This is centrally a sovereignty issue. Looted treasures must be returned to Ethiopia. But beyond sentimentality, we need to make this arrangement more practical and sustainable. So why not support Ethiopia in the design and management of museums and tourist attractions? Why not extend technical support and research collaborations? And why not share in the profits of such ventures and for once tell balanced stories in the places where battles were actually fought? Why not bring Queen Victoria's crown to Ethiopia for display, as not all Ethiopians can afford to travel to the UK?
So, should looted historical artifacts remain in Britain's museums, or should they be repatriated to Ethiopia? Joining us now to discuss this, we have Maza Mingiste. She is a Fulbright scholar and the author of the novel Beneath the Lion's Gaze. She joins us from New York. Also in New York, Maxwell Anderson, an author and the former director of the Dallas Museum of Art. And in Newcastle under Lyme in the United Kingdom, we have Awol Alo, and he is an associate professor of law at Keele University. Hello, everybody. It's great to have you here in the stream.
So I want to start with our community because we put this question to them, and this is what we asked. Do you think artifacts plundered from Ethiopia by the British Army 150 years ago should be returned? And this is pretty reminiscent of a lot of the comments we got. Stanley here says, this isn't a question to debate. I mean, the answer is obvious. However, it may not be as obvious to this person who also tweeted in. Paul said it should only be returned to Ethiopia once they can guarantee that the artifacts won't be sold to art lovers around the world. And currently, I think they're safer in British hands. Awol, you can see the debate has started online right there. Which side of it do you fall on?
I think the ethical responsibility, the moral responsibility to safeguard these treasures and cultural artifacts that belong to particular countries. But as treasures, they are also universal in terms of their values and valued by peoples and societies around the world. So the responsibility to safeguard them is collective. And in some cases, if the rightful owners of these cultural properties for several reasons are incapable of providing the kind of security and preservation that these items require, then those who have the resources and technical know-how can always support them. So this is really not, as the first tweet noted, this is not an issue for debate. And of course, these properties has to be sent back to their rightful owners, to their moral owners. But in terms of debates around preservation and their integrity, other nations, other people around the world can actually support them. And a lot of the UNESCO conventions that regulate issues around how these artifacts, properties should be protected, provide specifically for international cooperation and assistance, both technical and financial.
So, Max, the reason this story blew up was because these various British museums said, we are going to loan your artifacts back to you as a long-term loan. That caused the furore. What do you make of that?
Right. Well, I think the fact with British museums is that it would require an act of parliament to allow them to deaccession, so-called, or to turn these works back to Ethiopia, which is not an impossibility, but it requires a public sort of maelstrom of interest within Britain to get members of parliament to say, it's time. It's time to take this wrong from 1868 and right it. And I don't know how that would play out within Britain, but that's just a legal construct. It's not, no one would debate, from my point of view, the moral argument that these works were wrested illegally from Abyssinia at the time, today, modern Ethiopia.
Does this look like a moral argument, though, to you, Max? We talked to the British Museum and they sent us a statement. It was a long statement. 2 bits stood out for us. Here's the first part. In terms of loans, the trustees of the British Museum have always been clear that they will consider, subject to the usual considerations of condition and fitness to travel, any loan requests for any part of the collection. The museum lends many thousands of objects all over the world each year. So, of course, please ask. We'll think about it. We may well send it to you if you've got the right conditions. That's not going into the nitty-gritty of the law. That's just them saying this stuff is our stuff and we'll loan it to you after we've had a think about it.
Yes, and to be fair to the British Museum, they've been extremely generous in making loans around the world to institutions of various sizes in various places. But the issue at hand here is not a loan. It is a claim. It is an absolute claim by the government of Ethiopia, which is saying a loan is not sufficient. That doesn't recognize our title.
Maza?
Yes. Well, I think the idea that the V&A Museum will loan Ethiopia back the items that were stolen from Ethiopia, that Ethiopia can be a borrower of its own items that were taken unlawfully, is a slap in the face to Ethiopians and to the Ethiopian government. I understand that there are difficulties and Parliament may need to get involved. You know, there are all the legalities and the complications that surround this. But I think the fact remains that this is, as Max said rightfully, that there's a moral obligation here. But I'd also like to point out that there were 3 instances where some of the looted items were returned to Ethiopia. And the first was to Emperor Yohannes, who succeeded Theodros after Theodros committed suicide. And then there were 2 other instances where I believe it was in 1924 and 1965 where items were returned to Emperor Haile Selassie. So this can happen. It has happened before. And I also think that if Italy, and this is something that Awal said on Twitter today or yesterday, if Italy can return the obelisk that they stole out of Aksum in 1937, after 68 years, and if they can return it with all the logistical difficulties, a few items from the V&A Museum, I mean, there are other things, but we're talking about this right now. I don't think it's an impossibility. It has happened before.
So you mentioned this can happen, Maza, and I want to bring up 2 tweets from our community members who are talking about how it could happen. This is Roosevelt, who first takes on the issue of the loan. She says, before they could get hands on those artifacts, lives were taken. They are a living memory that this violence and plunder happened to us. That they still ask for countries to take them back on loan is a reminder that they don't fully appreciate the terror of their forefathers and mothers. Another person weighs in. This is Samson, and he does a little edit of a headline. This image sums it up properly, he says. So he tweeted this to us. Looted Ethiopian treasures in the UK should be returned on loan. He changes it to, instead of could, should be, and they should be returned with interest. Ewal, I want to bring this to you because several people have brought up money, compensation, that they should be given back along with some of the funds that these countries don't have, that they could have had if they were in their country to begin with.
Yeah, I think I want to go back to the point earlier raised in relation to, measures Parliament needs to take in order for these cultural property to be repatriated to Ethiopia. Now, Ethiopia is a sovereign state. In terms of its dealing with the UK, it deals with it as a sovereign state. So what the UK government does in terms of changing its legislation has no bearing whatsoever on Ethiopia's claim. Right? So the relations between Ethiopia and the UK is governed according to international law. UK's own internal legislation has no bearing on that claim. But in international law as well, there is an obligation on the part of the UK to recognize the rights that the Ethiopian people have over this cultural property. There was a similar case in 1960s brought to the International Court of Justice, which is the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. It was a case brought by Cambodia against Thailand. And the underlying principle in that case was really important for the case at hand here. And the court said that there is an obligation to restore removed cultural property to the state from whose territory it originated. And the court said this is a principle implicit in the sovereign power, in the sovereign authority of the state. So in terms of kind of legal difficulties, I don't think there is an insurmountable legal or moral issue here.
I have another thought that I actually want to pose to Max. Max, you have been a director of a museum. I'm really curious, beyond this legal framework that may well be impacting, definitely is impacting, what British museums can do in terms of restitution, giving art back. What about the idea of maybe just feeling embarrassed and awkward about the situation that you're in charge of all of these stolen goods, basically? Here's Tristan Hunt, and he is the director of the Victoria and Albert Museum. He wrote a blog about the Magdala 1868 exhibition. I'm just going to scoot down here because he describes some of these objects. They are stunning pieces with a complex history. That phrase, a complex history, that feels like a euphemism right there, Max. The idea about, as a museum director, when you are being asked to give items back, what are you thinking?
So before answering that, I would just second what Awal said in respect to the government of Ethiopia and the government of the United Kingdom. I think the only point is that the Victoria and Albert Museum by itself needs the government of UK to force its hand, as it were, if that's going to happen. I'm not suggesting that it's not utterly within the realm of likelihood that two nations should sort this out between themselves. I think that the question you ask about personal obligation is a critical one. When I was director of the Dallas Museum of Art, I restituted an antiquity to the Republic of Turkey when evidence was presented to me that it was looted, and looted in recent times in the late 1990s. And the same with the Republic of Italy. I actually approached the Republic of Italy to confirm that these works were looted, and I did the same with the Turkish authorities. I didn't wait to be approached. So I'm accustomed to understanding that the challenges that befall a director. And I think the challenge in this instance is that Great Britain has not been as, let's say, forthcoming as certainly the parties on this conversation are advocating. But I would suspect that we're seeing a change in attitude, in popular attitude, which will inevitably have an effect on museum policy and on the opinion of the British people.
Well, Maz, I want to bring up a concept that a few people in our community are raising. This is Mamo on Twitter, who says, these things should stay in London. It's safer in London than Addis or anywhere in Ethiopia. Now, we got a response, a bit of a formal response via video comment from the embassy, the Ethiopian embassy in the UK. And this is what the deputy head of mission told the stream.
Yes, I do believe that all these cultural artifacts should be returned back to Ethiopia because these are our identities and history of Ethiopia, and also this symbol of civilization of Ethiopian peoples. And also Ethiopians are able or capable of preserving and displaying their own heritage. That's why the government's policy is full eventual restitution.
So Maza, he says Ethiopia is capable of preserving and displaying. Some people online say they're not so sure.
Well, I think that the idea that Ethiopia or other nations that are maybe not from the West are not as capable of taking care of their own historical artifacts and treasures is really a condescending, patronizing, and racist form of thinking that should be. We should have moved further than this by now. But I would just like to point out that in Ethiopia, we have the bones of Lucy, which is one of the many, many, many treasures that are still in the country and still kept safely. Ethiopia is capable of this and can take care of these items. And I do think that there's an opportunity for the V&A Museum to also work in collaboration with Ethiopia in making sure that Ethiopia has the most technologically advanced mechanisms for safekeeping and preserving some of these artifacts, but it's already happening there. It's not that Ethiopia at all is failing, but I think that there's room for improvement. But it's not. I completely disagree with the comment that Ethiopia is incapable. Yeah. Go ahead, Awa.
Can I just intervene here? Yeah, and I fully agree with Madha's point that this is extremely condescending. It simply reproduces the colonial narrative that, you know, societies in the global south are not capable of providing protection for these precious treasures that are so sacrosanct in their culture. And some of these artifacts, by the way, have some very strong religious significance and cultural significance for the Ethiopian people. So the idea that they cannot provide protection is just downright condescending. And I think the most important point here is the question of who actually owns these properties. And I think the argument about providing protection is a very secondary question. It's an auxiliary question. So instead of focusing on the secondary question of whether we'll be able to provide protection or not, the first question that we need to determine is who owns these properties. If we own them, if Ethiopia owns them, it should be repatriated to Ethiopia and then.
Max, go ahead.
Yes,
I agree with you. Forgive me for interrupting. I was going to say it's almost irrelevant because the fact of the matter is that the possessor and owner of something has the right to treat it as they choose to. We're all confident that the Ethiopian authorities would apply a great deal of effort to safeguarding, ensuring that these works were protected, that they were in a climate-controlled environment to the extent possible, and that they were made available for public viewing and appreciation and learning. There is an example that some would cite, which is that the Republic of Turkey had a successful lawsuit against the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They brought back over 160 treasures that had been looted from Turkey. They went to a museum, a regional museum in Turkey, and several of them were subsequently stolen from that museum. Now, this is an exception. It's like a red herring that's brought up. But I think that there will be voices that say you can't always count on a source country to have the resources and, frankly, the ability to battle corruption that can make difficulties down the road. But it's irrelevant. The core point that you make is the correct one. Who owns it is where you start. What happens to it downstream, I think it's a fantastic idea that the V&A could be helpful as a collegial institution to enhancing the security and climate control and protection of the works if they were returned.
Right, so guess while you've been discussing these artifacts, we've been looking at various videos of these artifacts on show. Tristram Hunt, again, is the director of the Victoria and Albert Museum, and he was thinking about how do I get out of this situation? What is the way forward? This is what he told us earlier this month. Have a look.
But as we look to the future, I think what we're interested in are partnerships around conservation, interpretation, heritage management, and these need to be supported by government assistance so that institutions like the V&A can support sister institutions in Ethiopia.
So you may remember that I showed you that blog post that Tristram Hunt wrote explaining about the Magdala exhibit, and underneath the blog post, a lot of conversation going on. Here is Ray. And this Ray is channeling what I'm thinking. I'm just a mere civilian, so I'm thinking what Ray's thinking. I think the Ethiopians should accept the offer of a long-term loan, then forget to give them back. Possession is 9/10 of the law. It doesn't matter how you get them back, it just matters that you do. Would the V&A really go to court to try and get them back once they were in Ethiopia, with all the negative publicity that would ensure? I doubt it. Max, I am thinking this. Every time there is a debate about, we're going to give you this exhibition, you can have it on loan. It belongs to that country. Why wouldn't they just steal back their own stuff? Tell us why that is problematic.
So I would hope that most of your viewers are concerned about the rule of law. And that,
so we're stealing back our own stolen goods, so isn't that the rule of law?
Well, I think the sovereign nations is the point. We're talking about two sovereign nations that should, through a mutual understanding, come to a result that everyone supports, rather than having an effort which would be seen as an end run. After all, the last thing we'd want to see is that works of art are no longer in circulation because no one trusts anyone.
Yeah,
I think that
was
you
the
don't want to start seeing.
downside when I was thinking about this plan about stealing back our art, or art that belongs to you, from museums that have been looking after it.
You know, honestly, I think if the Ethiopian authorities were willing to accede in the short term to a loan that could go to Addis Ababa, that could be shown there, that could be part of what changes attitudinally the British people's understanding about the preparedness of the Ethiopian people, and then motivate the active parliament.
But whether or not that will actually happen, is debatable. I want to read this comment we got on YouTube Live. Keisha says, if Britain begins to return Ethiopian treasures, then people would start going through the whole stash of the British Empire's treasures and jewels. They are afraid they might have little to nothing left. Someone else raises this point I wanted to bring up. This is via Twitter. Jonathan says, additionally, greater amount of people can see them in the UK rather than going to Ethiopia. And that is the idea that some have raised of cosmopolitanism, that being able to go to Europe to see these artifacts does them more good. Rob here disagrees with that. He says, tell me how many Ethiopians were allowed to travel to the xenophobic UK to view the cultural treasures that were looted from them. Maza, I know you want to get in here, but you can see this debate and where it's headed. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, this idea of maintaining a museum's cosmopolitanism as one of the reasons not to give back looted items is, I think, it's a fallacy. I think that the person who tweeted was absolutely right, thinking about how difficult it is for Ethiopians to get to Europe sometimes, to apply for a visa, to pay for the cost, then to travel, and then to see their own items that was stolen. I find that idea absolutely repugnant. And the idea that a museum claims that it needs some kind of cosmopolitanism maybe lets you know how much those museums need these items, and they understand very well that they don't intend to give it back, because they intend to keep or maintain the value of their museum for other people. But I do think that what Tristan Hunt, hold on, let me finish. I do think that what Tristan Hunt said about maintaining or developing some kind of a collaboration or partnership is the right way, but I think that it should go the other way, that it's up to Ethiopia to decide whom to loan those items to and for how long.
Oh, I hope you won't mind me getting you to stand down for a moment, because I really want to hear from Ephraim Amare, and he's the director of the National Museum of Ethiopia. What he has to say, really important. Let's have a listen.
We have a lot of written documents that show they carried out a planned and organized looting in Makdala. We also know that these treasures are in the British Museum. It is clearly known from where these treasures came and to whom they belong. Our main question has never been to have them on loan. Ethiopia's position has always been the restoration of those illegally looted treasures, not to borrow them.
So It doesn't sound like there's much room for negotiation there from the director of the National Museums of Ethiopia. Malika, what do you want to leave us with?
Edna says, as an Ethiopian, every time this issue is raised, it pains me, but it's important to keep this conversation alive and bring awareness to this injustice.
We will continue our conversation, but online with Maza and Maxwell and Awol. Thank you so much for being part of our program today. We will see you at #AJStream. See you next time. Thanks for watching.